It's really good to see each one of you. I can't tell you how much I wish we could be together, but we're as together as we're going to be at this point in time. And I do appreciate you getting together with us to think about how best to keep our boards engaged at this time of a global pandemic. In 2005, I was in Baton Rouge right after Hurricane Katrina. New Orleans was under martial law, so most of the nonprofit world was trying to find a place to live in Baton Rouge so that they could be as close to home as possible. And I got a crash course in what it's like for nonprofit leaders, staff and board leaders, to try to figure out how to work with an abruptly closed organization with an indefinite reopening period, and really understood a lot about what was best practice and what was not. And one of the things that we're going to talk about this morning is that each of you has managed through times of crisis before. This is not your first rodeo, I would venture to say. You were around for 9/11 or 2008, other times where you have had to really be steady and do the best you could to be helpful and supportive. So we're going to, later in our time together, we're going to talk a little bit and get you to think a bit about what did you learn from the previous times. But I know that having had that very clear experience in New Orleans right after the storm, that when the world goes mad, you need to keep your friends close. You need to practice transparent communication as often as you need to communicate. Keep people with you, keep them understanding and knowing what is unfolding, so that when we get back to whatever the next normal is, not new, but next, we're all there together and we have a shared sense of evolution and context of where our organization is. So I really do want us to think hard, and we will be talking some about board meetings and frequency and format and a variety of different kinds of things. You are here because you have accepted the challenge as a board leader or a staff leader, we have both on the phone, to make sure that you do the best possible work to preserve your mission and to protect the people, both those you serve and the things that they need from you, and the people on your staff who serve them. So this is really a tumultuous and challenging time for absolutely everyone. There is not a soul who has not had their world turned upside down in the last several weeks. It was a deep pleasure of mine. Those of you who know me know that I'm the founder of the Bear Center for Nonprofit Management and also the Covestro Center for Community Engagement. And so it's been my great privilege to work in this community for over 20 years. And so when I looked at the list of registered organizations, I saw that, like most of our classes, this represents the full spectrum of types of nonprofits. We have big organizations here, we have smaller organizations here, we have arts organizations, environmental organizations, human service organizations, educational organizations. And so I'm trying to make my suggestions to you as universally helpful as possible, recognizing that each of you has a very distinct and unique situation. But I would, and one of the things when we have our classes in a classroom, one of the things we really like is dialogue. We really like to make sure that what is being said is useful and that you can clarify or challenge. Maybe it doesn't fit for where you are. And so this morning, because we have over 50 people on the phone with us, we can't do question and answer and get through in an hour. Did you pack your pajamas? It would take us a long time if we really did question and answer. But I do ask that you use the chat room, that you do ask questions so that you get clarifying information, or you share an experience that you have, or you challenge and say, I don't know that that will work for us. And we will periodically stop and try to talk and answer about the questions as they come forward. But I also want to say to you, this is not the only way we intend to help you. If you have a really specific situation that you need help with, then I let you know that we're going to be doing, again, at no charge, consults on governance, where you can sign up and work with a person one-on-one to really talk about in detail whatever the particular situation is that you're facing. So when you ask your questions this morning, I would ask that you make them useful to more than just your organization, not tremendously specific, but I bet if you're having that challenge, others are as well. And so it would be great to do that. At the center, we think none of us is as smart as all of us. So the chat room function is really an important part of this. And my colleagues, Yvonne Van Heidsma and Jen Pease from the Covestro Center for Community Engagement, are on the phone with you and watching the chat room, and will make me stop talking, which is not always easy, but they will make me stop talking and take a question as these questions arise. So, so let's get started with a poll. And we will get started in just a minute. There it is. Okay, so let's see. Would you please respond to this question? Can you see the question? How often have you met since the pandemic hit? About March the 15th. So Yvonne is saying, I muted everyone except me. Please use the chat feature. Are people responding?
I responded.
Thank you. Hi, Sue.
Hi, Peggy.
Good to see your face.
You too.
Let's see. I'm not seeing any responses, Yvonne.
Yep, we're up to 50. We're almost
Okay, great. So let's
10
see
more.
then.
5 seconds. Here we go.
Okay, so about a third of you have not yet had a meeting. We'll be going to be talking about that. And then another 14% canceled the meeting because I'm sure you were concerned about how to meet. Not everyone has access to technology. Not everyone is comfortable with it. About a third of you have met once. Less than a quarter of you have met every week. And some of you have been meeting very frequently. So during this time, I have been on, so thank you, Yvonne. If we could move to the slides now, I appreciate it. I have been meeting with client organizations, and I have clients who are meeting every day, which I think is excessive and burdensome, and we'll talk some more about that. And I have clients who have not yet met. So, so this morning, we are going to be working from an article that I was fortunate to find called Boards of Directors in the Tunnel of the Coronavirus Crisis. Does that feel somewhat like your life experience right now, that you are in a tunnel of a coronavirus crisis? So the McKinsey & Company, I always try to find people who are smarter than I am. Not hard, but I do it. At any rate, McKinsey & Company had some people write this article. Next slide, please. Write this article just a few days ago. And I thought it was useful to think about our time together to sort of focus our conversation around these 3 principles of engagement. Be deliberate about where you focus your attention. As many of you all know, I'm a Peter Drucker devotee, and they say Drucker never said the word focus in a singular fashion. He said focus, focus, focus. And I don't know about you, but I've been foggy and distracted and all manner of things through this experience. And so to be reminded that we need to be focused, and we will unpack that additionally in a minute, is, I think, a good way to start. What do we need to be doing? Where can we make the most difference? What will be helpful? Don't increase management's burden. So the issue around how frequently to meet and what kinds of reports you need and a whole lot of things are both your responsibility, your fiduciary and your legal responsibility, but also being extremely focused about what reports you really need to be able to make good decisions and not increasing the burden of the staff. Now, as I said, we are on a call with all different kinds of nonprofits. Some of you are large and have specialized staff you have a CFO who can be running the numbers as we speak and that kind of thing. But 75 or 80% of not-for-profits have staffs of 10 or fewer people. They are generalists, and they are trying right now to put the food in the trunk of the car of the people they serve to see that that person doesn't go hungry tonight. And their time to run detailed reports is very limited. So we're going to talk some more about how do you not increase their burden while playing your appropriate role as a board member. And then how can you augment management's capacity? Now, the language in this is very stiff and formal and may not sound at all like your organization, but I thought it was a useful framework to think about. The issue for nonprofit boards is often what is appropriate for governance, what is appropriate for management, how do we observe the rules of the road for each, and what is different right now because of the crisis in which we find ourselves in that management and governance equation. And I want to talk with you all about what I think are some things that are both need to be preserved about being careful not to micromanage, and also maybe changed a bit because you can be directly helpful. If I could have the next slide, please. Do we have some questions that need to be thought through? Okay, moving on. So that the first thing was be deliberate about where you focus your attention. And so as I was saying to you, what's the role of management? What is the role of the board in a time of pandemic? But what is the role of the board in a time of pandemic or in any other time is to try to have a little distance, to try to go up from the dailiness and have a longer view. So strategy work, which is certainly different now, is still part of the board's opportunity and responsibility to help the people who, again, are in it, some of them up to their eyeballs, to also have some sense of what's going to happen next and how we're going to manage through this. So management versus governance. Governance people have a responsibility to continue to plan. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The title of this class would be, was about engaging your board. And I have personally worked with over 1,000 nonprofit boards as my personal clients over the course of my career. And if I had to say on a pie chart, what percentage of my clients were asking for help with engaging their full board, everybody on the board, I would say that, I was 75 or 80%, because engaging the board at the best of times is a challenge across the board. This is a place for you to look at your committee structure and think about what committee work might look like in light of what is going on now. But it also is to be reminded that we have a board, and all of those people were recruited for your board because we have an intention to have diverse perspectives. We need to hear from a variety of different people to make good decisions. They also are on your board because they have some type of expertise. It may be direct expertise of finance or HR or some other thing, but it also may be the expertise of knowing the community very well and being able to work with the community as we all go through the changes that are coming. And as I said again, there's also this piece that the IRS requires there be a board because they want financially disinterested people to be thinking and working with nonprofit organizations, making decisions based on mission, purpose, and the community good. So the board, as we go through this, we may find ways to engage the board more fully at this point in time because there's actual urgency around engagement. And some of the reasons that board members don't get engaged when things are more usual is that they just don't feel that needed, and they're busy. They're very busy. So I think there is an opportunity to be strategic as board leaders in engaging perhaps people who have not been as engaged at times in the past. And then this is a moment, I'm hoping that many of you have a current strategic plan, or at least a recent strategic plan. This is a moment for you to really pull out that strategic plan and remember who you are. Because although much is changing and flexibility and adaptability are qualities that are absolutely necessary, you really have to see that you remember what was true on March the 15th. where were you? In many, many cases, you were doing very well. Things were going well. You were anticipating program expansion. You were looking with confidence to the future. Some of you were experiencing leadership transition, which was a challenge and will continue to be a challenge. But I want you to go back as a board in a meeting and say, really, where were we? What was our state when this all started to happen? What were our initiatives? What were our big ideas about who we were and what we intended to accomplish? How were we doing? And then the next question, of course, is where will you be? And how can we work together to make sure that we preserve our core values, our core, that we remain true to who we are while we adapt, change, flex, and try new ways of working. So strategy, first, remember what the strategy was, and then how is it that we can both make sure we stay true to ourselves and we also are able to make good decisions moving forward. So if you don't have a strategic plan or you haven't done one in a long time, you might do a quick strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, but ask everyone to think back to the beginning of March. Because my point is, I want to make sure that you know who you were before what you're going to become. So if you don't have a strategic plan, there are planning tools, and there may be somebody on your board who knows how to do strategic planning because they do it at their own job, who could quickly run the board through a let's remember where we were before we start talking about where we're going. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Should we take a question now? Yvonne? Are there questions that we should be looking at? I'm not seeing the chat if I don't open it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for people that don't have a strategic plan, that,
Okay.
you know, where do you go from here?
Yeah, I see where we are. Okay, next slide, please. So the second thing was don't increase the management's burden. So now here we are. Let's talk about what does that look like now? Now you have responsibilities. Next slide, please. Yeah, this one. Thank you. Working as partner to staff. So you have responsibility to, as I mentioned earlier, the IRS to be legally and fiduciarily responsible. But let's think about the board meetings. So some of you have not had any board meetings at all. Some of you have had a few, and some of you are having a lot. One of the things about any good meeting is that it has focus. So why are you having this meeting? What is the agenda for the meeting? Are there decisions to be made, or is this a meeting to discuss and ruminate and come back together to make a decision? But what is the focus for the meeting? I'm sure, like all of you, I read all kinds of things on the internet these days, and I was reading an ED Facebook group, and they were talking about the fact that they had certainly realized that there were any number of things that did not need a meeting but could be resolved in an email. And that we had in some ways gone way overboard in having way too many meetings because we were anxious and unsure of how to work at home or from home or whatever it is we're doing. So I say first, what's the focus? What is it that we need to discuss? Why do we need to discuss it? And somewhat, what decisions do we think we are going to be needing to make at this meeting? That will somewhat give you direction on the frequency of the meeting. And again, I don't have a one size fits all on this. I can tell you that prior to this crisis, we recommended boards think about meeting every other month. In many cases, we felt like once a month was unnecessarily frequent. There wasn't that much change in 30 days, but by 60 days, there probably were things that needed board attention and board knowledge. Some groups, of course, meet on a quarterly basis, and that's always made me a little nervous because that means if you miss a meeting, you've missed 6 months of the organization's life. And so I had lots of opinions. I have served on 34 boards of directors myself since I was a kid of a girl, and they've been little organizations and national organizations, and I feel like I've kind of done a lot of different ways of working, and somehow that every other month frequency felt pretty good. Not now. There's too much change, there's too much peril. Again, back to that McKinsey article. They said you need to know about when you need to meet when there is a clear and present danger to your organization or there is an urgent agency altering decision. Well, we are certainly living through agency altering decisions and in some ways clear and present danger. So my goal on this is not necessarily that you increase the number of formal meetings, but that you have sufficient meetings and you practice excellent communication. So now there's a question around the format. So here you are on a Zoom meeting, 50 of us together on a Zoom meeting, and it has its advantages and its distinct limitations as far as I am concerned. And frankly, guys, I've gotten zoomed out where I just can't do it again. These are intense. We see each other much more up close and personal than you do across a table in a room with, distractions. And so I think you want to be thoughtful once again about the format. Some people are not proficient with Zoom, although I think people are getting increasingly proficient with Zoom. But nonetheless, sometimes a conference call, sometimes a video conference call, sometimes, again, an email chat that allows for thought to be given to a topic before you get on the meeting. But at any rate, you've got several different ways to meet, and you should be thinking about which one is right for the focus of this meeting. So, and then finally, the fourth F there is fellowship. One of the things that I have kind of preached, I guess, in these years is that all too often boards don't know each other, and yet we require them to be trusting and candid with people that they really don't know very well. Well, one of the things that this crisis gives us is a view of my bedroom, huh? You're seeing my cat there above the door and my exercise bike in the back. I mean, you know things about me that, I frankly would never have showed you. And so we are having fellowship in an unusual way, if you will, but I think it's worth considering if you need to do some sort of a check-in. So I have been on several board meetings on Zoom, and one of the board chairs of an excellent organization we're working with started his new job on Monday, March the 16th. He has yet to enter the building or meet his coworkers. That makes a difference to how present he can be to the nonprofit's concerns because he's in the middle of massive change on top of whatever else. We certainly have board members who have family members who are sick or they are very frightened they will become sick, and that is a constant burden on their shoulders that they carry into the room with them. So many years ago, I had a board chair on a national board who would have us, she just asked the question, how are things in your part of town? And it was a way for people to talk about either professional things that were going on for them that were successes. They could brag a little bit, this is good, or they could share a concern that they have, or personal. But the role of having a little bit of using this opportunity, this weird opportunity to see that we can know each other better means that the quality of your decisions will probably be better. And that's really what you're there to do, is make really good decisions. We tend to make better decisions when we can be candid, and we tend to be candid with those we like and trust. So those are some things about the board meetings.
One more thing, Peggy, we have a question here about the bylaws. Do the bylaws need to stipulate that you are allowed to have online meetings?
We have been told by an attorney that we consulted on this issue, because you're not the first person that asked this, that the issue for the state of Pennsylvania is that you have a meeting where everyone can be heard. So a Zoom meeting where people may not choose to speak, but they have the opportunity to speak on an issue is the operative principle. You can't do a YouTube where an agenda has been set by one person and they've done pretty much what I'm doing right now and have that be a legal meeting. But if there is a way for your board to meet and participate in decision-making, as I understand it from our lawyer, that will work for you. And the other thing is that if you resort to an email vote, the vote must be unanimous. There cannot be any, yays and nays on an email vote. And I will say to you that I also think that once we get through this, you are going to want to go back and look at your bylaws to make sure that your bylaws do provide for a multiplicity of meeting formats. But as I understand it, and Vaughn, correct me if I'm wrong, you are okay as long as everyone has the opportunity to weigh in on a decision. I hope that was helpful. Okay, so moving on, then in the strategy versus operations, we've talked a bit about this, and there may be some places where operations could be very helpful in helping the staff manage, and I'm going to return to that in a moment. But I mentioned to you as we got started, I want you to think a few minutes. Most of you on this call have managed through a variety of crises in your own personal life, in your professional life, and global or national crises like 9/11 or like 2008. So I want you to think about some of the things that you have learned from working through a crisis, and see that those things may be relevant and applicable. Although this is an unprecedented type of crisis, we still learn some things about transparency and good communication. We learned some things about steadiness and optimism. We learned some things about being available and present for other people wherever they are. I was talking to a good friend yesterday, and I said to her, I feel like my moods are like the weather. I'll feel really good and I'll feel optimistic and ready to go, and then I'll just not. And so once again, learning to practice radical self-acceptance and radical acceptance of others as we are working together, knowing not what's going on with individuals. But when have you managed through a crisis, and what have you learned? If any of you have some brilliant insight that you'd like to share, please put that in the chat room. Okay, moving on. Yvonne, next slide, please. Thank you. So here's this augmenting management capacity, and this may be the most interesting and subtle piece that we have to think about this morning. I just mentioned to you that many of you have crisis management skills, and you should be sharing those as you go through. How do you communicate? I know Yvonne Campos is on this call with us, and she's a master communicator. So, as things change, as programs are understandably shifted, as you move through this time and into the next normal, how do we communicate, and with whom do we communicate about the changes within our organization? 2 of my clients have new executive directors since the pandemic hit. Let's reflect on that for just a moment to say, at what point do we introduce the new executive director, and how do we deal with the fallout from the loss of the previous executive director? So crisis management skills, crisis communication, ways of thinking. Once again, on many of your boards, you have people who in their business life practice planning. They know how to do projections. They know how to do scenario planning. If you all are familiar with the concept of scenario planning, it's a way when you're in a very uncertain period, as we all are, to think about some of the what ifs. What if we are able to continue to secure additional government funding to pay our payroll? What does that open up for us possibly in programming opportunities? So, in a scenario plan, you have a cross, and you make spectrums from more funding to less funding, more clients to fewer clients, and you play it all the way around that graph to try to think what would happen to us if this and that were to be true. Now, there is so much uncertainty that even framing the scenario is a real challenge, and I get that. But the point here is that what I'm seeing when we're working with clients is talking about it is better than not talking about it. Thinking through is better than not thinking. How's that for a concept? I'm there, guys. Thinking is a better thing than not thinking. And so maybe there are some other tools that you can use. I mentioned a SWOT analysis. We have other tools that we'd be happy to share with you that you could use again to spark conversation at a board meeting and jostle people to think deeply about the situation at hand, not necessarily traditionally. The other piece of this augmenting management capacity speaks to the fact that once again, in many cases, you recruited your treasurer because he or she was good with the money. You found people who had finance responsibilities in their work life and could help you manage your finances. Whenever I have ever been a board chair, I have recruited a CPA like next thing if we didn't have one, and my instruction to them was keep us out of trouble. That was, I don't need any trouble in the finance area. So this is where this begins to be a complicated conversation, because you have worked to try to keep the boundaries between management and governance clean and clear, and that was the right thing to do. Although your treasurer probably was pretty intimate with the nonprofit's finances. Many of them are very helpful and involved. But if there are people on the board who aren't treasurer, but do have finance or might be able to help play out some of the scenarios of what does social distancing look like in the future. At our university, they're playing out multiple scenarios about how best to serve our students who are residents and non-residents, and what is that going to look like? Well, that's some pretty sophisticated financial forecasting. And in your organization, you are likely to want to think about how is this going to play out, and what are the ramifications for our funding sources, our programs, and our staffing. So you may want to, as a board leader, I encourage you to look at your board list again and think who on this board might have had to do that kind of work, that kind of scenario building around financial modeling that we could get to help us. Similarly, HR. So for all these years that I've worked with boards, they've always tried to recruit somebody who was an HR person, and then they immediately said to them, and you can rewrite our employee manual, to which the person sometimes said, I did not join this board to do my day job. I want to be on the program committee. And so they're on the program committee, and that's great. But right now, HR is as tumultuous and roiling as ever in my career. And understanding what is the difference between laying off or furloughing. How do we best preserve the best results for our staff, but build a way in which they will want to return to us, not continue to draw unemployment. There are all kinds of things that need to be considered. And we are in a sector which has not traditionally done HR much at all. Again, many organizations, very small staffs, don't have an HR person on their staff, and have and may or may not have one on their board. And so the HR function has been concerning to me as we look at the baby boomers retirement going forward, which is still happening and still going forward, although may change because people's retirement funds may look different now. But at any rate, HR is a big deal, and it has become a bigger deal. And so looking to your board to see if there is someone who may not have played that role before, but could really be helpful with that role now is very, very important. Relationships. So in some cases, board members have been instrumental in securing funding for their nonprofit. Their good friend who has a private foundation or a donor advised fund or some other way was the person they recruited to make a gift to their organization. That probably means that they are the very best person to communicate with that particular donor about how things are going, to assure that donor that money is being responsibly spent, and that we are on it. We don't know exactly how we're going to manage everything going forward, but we respect the fact you made a gift to us. We respect the fact of our friendship, and we will keep you in the loop as we move forward. So in some cases, there is that kind of relationship. And it is very important that, once again, the organization communicate broadly and clearly with their constituent stakeholders, however those people are. The other point about relationships, and again, this goes back to me watching what happened with Katrina. The nonprofits who really were in relationship communication and engaged with the larger community they serve were the nonprofits that thrived. So in many cases, this is difficult at this point in time, and this is something that will go on for the next several months or years. But looking again, you have people on your board who were recruited because they know the community, they're respected in their community, and they can talk to their community in a trusted and valued voice and listen to their community in a trusted way. So those kinds of relationships need to be activated. And again, I'm thinking with your hat on as the board chair, looking at your board as a treasure trove of potential supports to your staff who once again may be outside putting the bag of groceries in the trunk of the car and would really appreciate it if a board member would think to call that generous person that they got to support the last gala and just chat with them about how things are going. I don't even think you need an elevator speech, guys. I think you need to be honest, direct, and friendly. And I think if we are honest, direct, and friendly with the people that matter to us, we will come through this in a far better way than if we have seemed to forget they were ever there. And then finally, government relationships. Those of you who are working in human service agencies and some other kinds of nonprofits know that in many cases, 75% of your revenue comes from the government. And again, after Katrina, I watched that whole thing where money had to be repurposed because that program was no longer possible, but we still needed that money so that we could keep the programs moving forward and continue to employ our staff. So if you know elected officials, if you know other government relationships, we are blessed to live in Pittsburgh, where, you know, we have a very engaged elected official group of people. And many of them have very strong relationships with lots of different nonprofits. I know there's lots of libraries on this call, and that's a place where this could be. But once again, go back and look at your board list, board chairs. Who's sitting on your board that you may have never asked before to do a particular task, and you're asking them now. And here's what we know for sure from research on volunteers. People volunteer when they are asked. So think about what is it that we need, ask them for it, and then be very careful to frame this all as a partnership with staff, not preempting the role of staff, but supporting and helping staff people manage a very unprecedentedly difficult time. So augmenting government management capacity does not mean you become a staff person. It does mean that you take the expertise, relationships, and knowledge and put them to work on behalf of the organization in a way that may never have been needed. And you may find that board engagement goes up dramatically because there is now urgency around that person's participation. Plus, if they're working from home, they may welcome the chance to do something that takes them out of themselves and out of their particular situation. So I think there's a real opportunity here. I think that there is a bit of an interesting challenge once this is over, if it ever is, to try to sort of move back into a more formal relationship of board versus staff. But nonetheless, right now, we need you, and we need to make board members feel that they are needed and that their expertise is relevant and valuable. So think about how best to do that. Okay, next slide. So I couldn't do a session with you guys and not just be reminding you of the basics of the role of the board. I know that I'm on this call with a lot of very experienced and skilled people, and you've been knowing this, as we say in the South, for a very long time. But let's just think about, these are the principal roles of the board. They have always been, I have written this list since the 80s, literally, just like this. But now what's different? So I noticed that there was a particular interest in bylaws, minutes, some of the legal aspects of being on a board. And I would say to you that one of the things I wonder about is, are minutes being taken when you do a board meeting on Zoom? And are they accurate, and do they reflect the conversation as it occurred? So the legal record of your corporation is your minutes, and you need to, when you are making decisions, that's not every, if you're having a brainstorming session, that is less important, although a record is a good thing for most people, but it's less about the legal aspect. But minutes of board meetings where there are votes being taken, et cetera, are still very important to maintain. And then, of course, the oversight of the organization to make sure that everything is being done in a legal fashion and that policies are being maintained where appropriate, et cetera. Let's talk a minute about the fiduciary role. The fiduciary role, for many boards, they think that board fiduciary equals fiscal oversight. And it does, of course, equal fiscal oversight. You are on a board because you are financially disinterested in the organization. You are not personally benefiting. This is conflict of interest stuff, that sort of thing. So you are not personally benefiting, nor are your spouse or children benefiting from the financial decisions that are undertaken by the board. And the IRS grants tax forgiveness because they are sure that there is a group of citizens who are providing financial oversight to the actions of the organization. So that is absolutely hardwired, written into the fiduciary role. And as you again are looking, I was on a board meeting yesterday with one of our clients, and his board, the executive there reported that they had gotten their PPP loan. It had come through, praise the Lord, they protected their payroll, and that the board members, different board members had called him every day to see if that had been submitted and if it had been successful. So that was a responsible act. I think it was driving him slightly crazy, but I think that again, that kind of oversight and keeping up with it is definitely part of your fiduciary responsibility. And this business around projections and cash flow and, really using, if you have a financial dashboard, boy, is this the time to really make sure it's measuring the right things and that you're using it well. There are many things about being fiduciarily responsible. But remember that fiduciary has a bigger meaning than fiscal. It means to hold the organization in trust. And so this is where I want you to think a bit about risk management. Wow, where are we living? We're living in a risky world. How in the world do we ask, financially disinterested citizens to also be good at managing risk and thinking about what is an appropriate risk? But I do think that we want the board to be optimistic and hopeful in spite of all of the indicators that are very dismaying and frightening. And so appropriate risk is really a very important part of your role as a board, and holding your staff and your community in trust. What does that mean for you? How do we hold them in trust? What do they need, want, aspire to? These are questions that are all written into the fiduciary role. How do we best protect, preserve, and defend, if you will, our organization's mission, purpose, programs, and people? So to hold your organization in trust is a big idea and an important one. And the next one is sort of very akin to it, and that is that you have a job to be an ambassador. So I spoke a minute ago about the possibility that you could be genuinely helpful with certain donors or certain government officials because of relationships and knowledge and community prestige, et cetera, et cetera. You are by definition respected when you are a board member. Of course, one of the things that haunts me is that people think people know what they're talking about if they say I'm on the board. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But nonetheless, this ambassador role, being active in seeing opportunities, being active, whether it's online or on a Zoom meeting, or when we are able to see each other again in that classic networking event, but being active to promote the interests of your organization. And furthermore, to look about how can we better partner? So this ambassador role takes on particular resonance at this moment in time, because one of the things that I know for sure from watching the way New Orleans recovered was that the nonprofits who worked in coalition, who worked in cooperation, whose focus was not on who gets the credit, but how do we get the work done for our community, those nonprofits came out of this thing stronger and better suited. And the ones who were isolated or turf driven, in many cases, died. So we really need you to be ambassadors and thinking about where are possible relationships, coalitions, cooperations, partnerships, possibly even to the point of merger, but really we don't have to go there. We have to think about strategic alliance and better moving work forward for the communities we serve and being spiritually gracious enough to let other people play. So the ambassador role is really, really an important one. And I hope that you're finding opportunities to promote and assert your organization's role in the community. And then under leadership development, replacing yourselves, this is an odd thing to be talking about on this call, but honestly, your responsibility is to keep your eye open for who should be the next board chair and who can best serve in that role. And so I've talked earlier about looking at your board list and really trying to think who could help us with this particular thing that we need help with and asking them to help. That is a leadership development opportunity par none. And when they come through like a champ, and we hope they come through like a champ for you, then you begin to get a sense of who could take on additional responsibility as we think next year about board officers or committee chairs or other ways in which we see value and opportunity in other people and give them the chance to lead. So, these are very important things for you to be thinking about. I'm looking at the chat room and seeing that a person just asked a really hard question. And they said that they lost $20,000 from a canceled event. I'm so sorry. You were joined in that by many, many people, but I'm very sorry to hear that. So should you pass a deficit budget? It has always been my belief that the fiduciary responsibility said we couldn't pass deficit budgets. Now, this is a different time with a lot of more uncertainty than we really have ever known. If you've been listening to the news, they've said this is far worse than 2008. Let me tell you, I had people who were so afraid in my office in 2008 that the fear rolled off of them in waves. And so the very word deficit budget is one of those blinking red flags. I would say that if you do, you are actively requiring that there be a very good development plan emerging about how that deficit will be met and met in the next fiscal year. Because the worst thing is to have accumulated deficits if it becomes a pattern. So should you pass one, I'd really prefer you try to figure out how you could replace that $20,000. You haven't done it yet. You can't do it yet, but you can be thoughtful about what are the resources that we do have, relationships, possibilities, new funding sources, et cetera, that might allow us to replace that $20,000. And if we can't do it by the end of this fiscal year, or the fiscal year that's under development, we're going to do it that year so that we are we're sure that we are not going to have this be a pattern or frankly an excuse as we move forward. So I hope that was helpful to you. That's one of those questions where we have people who are finance people who work very closely with nonprofits on budget development, et cetera, and we would be happy for you to get a consult so that you could talk in more detail with someone who frankly can give you a better answer than I can. But this is just telling you in principle, I really don't think we're supposed to pass deficit budgets. I think that violates our fiduciary responsibility. This is an extraordinary time, so I think there could be some difference in that now. Okay, so I want us to think once again, as we've come close to the end of this call, about the role of the board and how we intend our board to react and behave through this and into the future. And they, in the McKinsey article, they again reminded us that big picture work, having these conversations about who are we, What do we know? And how are we going to move forward? So big picture work will help to develop an organization's posture and the broad direction of travel as the next normal becomes clearer. I love their use of language. I think this is a really evocative statement that there's there. But I particularly liked the develop an organization's posture. And I spoke to you about receptivity to working with others. I think that again, working in coalition, working cooperatively, being gracious to each other and seeing merit and opportunity in partnership, which is hard, has always been hard, and in many cases disappointing for many of you on this call. Believe me, I'm an old lady, and I've seen a lot about how much time has been wasted in partnerships that were not productive. But a posture says we're open to it. A posture says we've got our work, we know you have your work, how can we better work together? What has the change in our lives changed us as the way in which we think about our work going forward? In some cases, we have been a community that has been pitted against each other by virtue of seeking funding from the same funder and that sort of thing. And we have worked hard to develop our brands and our distinctiveness and our reason to be the one who should be funded. So this posture piece is a really important one to say, what is our posture now? And then the second piece of this is the broad direction of travel. For a number of years, many of you know, we have done, countless strategic plans for countless nonprofit organizations in Pittsburgh over the last 20 years. And over the last several years, I have become restless with the word strategic plan. That sounds weird, but I have really wanted us to think about strategic direction and operating plans. So if we have this broad direction of travel, then we know once again who we really are, what really matters to us, how we measure the big picture of our success. And the operations are going to change and morph and move and calibrate and all kinds of things. That's really management's side of the house anyway. But the broad direction of travel, what matters to us, what we intend, how we intend to make a difference, what is vital to achieving the mission and purpose of our organization, all comes into play under that broad direction of travel. And I hope if you've heard me say anything this morning, you've heard me say, be true to yourself. You are beautiful. You are beautiful in your mission alignment, in your mission organization, in the generosity that you have shown to our community for taking on brave and difficult things over and over and over again. So give yourselves credit for that and know that part of the reason that you've been able to do that was because you were authentic, because you were doing work that mattered, that you were doing work that came from your values, the values of the organization writ large into the world. So that broad direction of travel will help you make better decisions going forward. But a posture that says, let's be open to what could be possible. Let's not think about the way it used to be too much and be open to how it can be going forward. And maybe we can do it together in a better way than we were able to do it apart, or certainly as we move forward, we can do it together. You all, I'm sure many have looked at the some of the different private foundation outreach that is going on. One of them, a generous one that is underway, is the Richard King Mellon Foundation. And you surely have noted that they have said that groups that apply in collaboration with each other will have a better chance. They say you can apply on your own and we may choose to fund you. But if you apply with somebody else, that's going to be a check mark in your plus column. So this has been a conversation. I have work journals from the 80s where we talked about collaboration and the value of it. And it is jolly hard to do and very challenging. But honestly, guys, this may be the moment in time where it finally becomes more true than it ever has before. With the baby boomers retiring at a rate of 10,000 or turning 70 at the rate of 10,000 a day, the change in the workforce, the change in the funding situation, the change, look around. become not an organization of 5 people, but work with an organization that means you have 20 people to work on your particular cause, and see what can possibly happen because of that. So if I could, next slide. I think that what I fear the most for my own life is that I will be regretful. I don't want regret at the end of my life. I want to feel that I did the very best I could. And so I think at this point in time, a question that you want to ask yourself and your fellow board members is, when this story is told, when the story of the great pause of 2020 is folk legend again, what will you wish you had done as a board member? How will you wish you had behaved, supported, contributed, and helped your organization, that you never would have joined the board if you didn't believe deeply in the work they do and the importance of their mission? So what will you wish you have done? Next slide, please. So I'd like to end with a call to action. Are there any questions, Yvonne, that we need to stop and think about right here?
A lot of them are around financial issues, and if they need, one specific one was, does a nonprofit need to adjust their budget for a grant request? Or
oh gosh,
that's a
complicated question. I really do think that I would be facile if I tried to answer it right now, but I'll be happy to talk to you about that. It does raise for me the issue of repurposing money. So all of you on this call know that if you have designated money in your budgets for a particular program or service, you cannot spend it on something else without permission from the grant maker. So you have to have it in writing. You need to write to your funder, tell them what the money, what sum of money it was and what it was designated to do, explain what has changed, and ask for their permission to repurpose that money to a new area or a revised program or something, so that when the auditor comes, and they will come again, you know, when the auditor comes and they're looking at your grant and they're lining up the money that was designated to a certain purpose with the way the money was spent, you have in your files permission from the funder to repurpose those funds for a new purpose that it was called upon by this particular situation that we find ourselves in now. But as far as you know, adjusting the budget or thinking about how you want to tell the story of what has happened to your organization because of COVID-19, I really hope you will take advantage of one of our consults and get better information about that. So the call to action is, Peter Drucker says, what are you going to do Monday morning? Well, I'm going to say, what are you going to do Thursday morning? This is Wednesday. So out of this call, if you would be willing to just put in the chat room some action that you intend to take, something you're going to do now with regard to your board, that will help us better understand how to frame things going forward in service to you and working there. I guess I will close the question again, drawing on the article that I used, was how will the nonprofit sector and its ecosystem be reshaped by this crisis? And what strategies should we pursue to emerge as a leader? At the Bear Center for Nonprofit Management, we believe that nonprofits build strong communities and that you are essential to the future, and that the leadership and the visibility and the voice that you have is one we can't do without. So we are looking to you to continue to lead, to insist on justice, to make this a more decent and humane place for all of us to live. We think that this change and this challenge needs us to think really differently, to move from a reconstruction sort of a model, to move to a reconstruction model rather than one of recovery. And I think that's a profound thing that I would like to leave you in closing. Think about a reconstruction, think about new opportunities, and hope we can be helpful to you as you move through this tumultuous and difficult time. Please reach out to the Covestro Center for Community Engagement if you want to work with board's work. or get additional resources around this, we'll probably do another one of these. We may restrict the numbers so you can talk more and I could talk less, and that might be good. But nonetheless, I thank you so much for your time this morning. It is a great pleasure to be in service to you and to be working in this community with all these people I love so much. I love the word Excelsior. It means ever upward. So Excelsior, beloveds. Bye.
Thank you, Peg.
Appreciate everybody.
Thank you so much.
You are most welcome.
Thank you very much. Very well.
I hope it was helpful.
Yes,
It
very
was.
helpful.
It was very much so.
Good. Excellent.
Thank you, Peggy. I'm more confident as a leader after
Excellent.
the seminar.
Excellent.
Thank you.
You are most welcome.
Thank you, Peggy. It was so awesome to see you. Inspirational as
Thank
usual.
you. If you could only see the lighting in my bedroom, you'd get a big laugh.
Thanks a lot. Very helpful.
Thank you.